Welcome to LEA 550, Leveraging Innovation. This is lecture one. For the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about diagnosing organizations. Now you're wondering, why are we doing that? Well, because when you're talking about innovations, you need to make sure that you understand what exactly needs to be innovated. Where does the change need to be applied? And that is where diagnostics comes in, where that you can properly and have a system for diagnosing where are the problems in the organization and where do we need to have um, some innovative practice. No organization is perfect. And in every organization, there is a shelf life as to how long something is going to be productive, how long you're going to be able to use a particular procedure before it becomes outdated or it's no longer as effective as it once was. So there's a lot of places for innovation. And when you're looking at organizational problems, there's a number of things that might come to pass. For example, low productivity. You're just not producing the way that you should be or that you need to. If you are in a church situation, you may not have the attendance that you once did, or you're not getting as many visitors as you used to. If you are dealing in an organization, you might not be making as many sales as you thought that you should or could or have in the past. Sometimes it has to do with cost. There's the cost of the items or the cost of the things that are necessary for you to be able to produce your product or do the things that you're doing has gone up. And there's other things as well, but all of these are signs of inefficiency. And so you look at those things. Something else is difficulty in starting or completing complex projects. Sometimes people are great at starting something and want to, implement something, but they don't finish. And, they got a great idea. And boy, we want to see this thing happen. We want to take this organization, our business in a new direction, but they don't complete those projects. And why are they not completing those projects? And then sometimes there is a declining demand for your particular product or service. And again, you could go back to church if you wanted to use that example about the fact that sometimes people are attracted to a new way of having church, of worshiping, and the way that church is conducted in services. Sometimes, there's, for instance, I can tell you that e-commerce has absolutely set the brick and mortar shops on their ear. I mean, they just, wow, here I am. And everybody's buying online now, and people aren't coming to the store. And so, how do you deal with those types of things? Sometimes there's transitions. For instance, say you are a family-owned business and you're going to be taking this business into a more business-like atmosphere. How do you make those particular transitions? Or, as we talked about just previously, what if the way that you are selling your products, now you've got to make a transition into a different type of thing? This happened in the collegiate realm, by the way, where that at one time it was all brick and mortar. You went to the campus, and now we have global campuses or online. In fact, that's what you're doing right now. And so this has been a tremendous transition that had to take place for companies. And how do you get them through that? These are some of the problems that happen. Employee turnover. Sometimes when every time that you lose an employee and then you have to start all over with training someone else, it adds more responsibilities and more stress on the staff that's already there. There's the cost of training that person, of actually hiring that person, getting that person there, and then actually the time to actually get that person up to speed can cost a tremendous amount. And so there's those kind of issues, morale issues, lots of things that can take place. And then you have your conflicts. Um, and maybe there's extreme conflicts or tensions that's taken place. Maybe that's the reason for some of the employee turnover. Um, Sometimes, again, we talked about low morale, and sometimes, there's uh, criticisms and that sort of thing. So anyway, sometimes there's lots of conflicts, multiculturalism. Hey, being able to work with people from another culture, people of other races, people of other nationalities. This can be something that a person needs to learn how to do. You certainly don't want to have a lot of conflict or misunderstandings because of that. And then, of course, there's the lack of innovation. Some people realize that, hey, there's a shelf life and we're here, but we don't know what to do. And we need a way to somehow figure out how can we get people to be innovative? How can we somehow come up with something new? So this is something else as well. And then sometimes it's the external threats and challenges. For example, if you have a lot of other businesses like yours that have entered into the market, how do you set yourself apart? How do you do that? Sometimes it has to do with quality. Maybe the quality of your products are going down. Maybe you're having some customer service issues. All of these things, and there's many more that I'm sure that I could list. The only other thing I'd say is sometimes you're just called in to do an assessment as well. But how do you deal with this? How do you deal with some of these problems that are there? We have a three-step thing that I want to talk about today, and that is we have a process for you to actually go through, which then we'll be delving into that process a little bit more later on. And there's interpretation, and then finally there are some methods that we will be using. So let's talk about the first thing in the process. And I want you to understand one thing that I think is extremely important. And that is that you, as a change agent, if you were a consultant, you need to make sure that you create and maintain a cooperative and constructive relationship with the decision makers. You also need to negotiate your relationship with other members within the organization. And the reason is because they're also going to have an influence on the decisions that you make. So if you're a person, for instance, that comes in, we're going to be talking about this in a little bit, but if you're coming in and absolutely, um, you know, approaching this thing from a very negative standpoint, everything's wrong. These people are stupid. Everything that they've been doing, instead of trying to understand, well, why have they done this? Is it just that the time on this has ended? It's time to go into something new, and appreciating what got them to where they are. Sometimes if you are off-putting in your analysis, you will immediately sever that relationship. And the moment you sever that, you're never going to be able to get your implementation in. So it's important in the first step of the process is to develop a constructive, not a destructive relationship with decision makers. Now, let's talk about some of the phases then. Here's kind of a step-by-step, some of the phases of diagnosis. And the first thing that I would say is scouting. That's what I would call it, scouting. It's where that you initially figure out, maybe you, if you were a consultant, you're meeting with, the client or some of the decision makers. Maybe if you are working in that particular company, that you are talking with those particular people that are the decision makers. And you want to explore what exactly are they wanting to accomplish. How do they see the problem? What are the problems? And let them present those problems. Let them present those challenges. Also a good time to assess the likelihood of cooperation, not just with the decision maker that you're meeting with, but maybe even some of the other extended people that would be a part of this. For instance, if you were at a college, and because I had this, I was consulting at a particular university and they were talking to me about in the initial meeting about how they wanted to get into blended style of online learning and that sort of thing. And I began to ask some questions, and it came out that one of the big problems is they were all in for wanting to do online learning, but some of the traditional faculty were absolutely against it. And so this was going to be a challenge. It was good to know this up front, to know exactly what was going to happen there. And then uh, contracting. This is where then that once you understand, you've scouted this out, there's a couple of things. If you are a consultant, one of the things that you do here is you negotiate and agree on the nature of the diagnosis and the client consultant relationship. So in other words, this is what we're looking for you to accomplish, and this is this is what we're hoping that you can do within this. I'll give you an example. I was asked to do some consulting for a missions program. It wasn't just a program; they were actually a company, but their main focus was missions. And there were a number of things that I saw that honestly they've got some problems with. But as we talked, specifically what they wanted to do is how do we increase or boost our visibility? That's all they wanted. They didn't want all of the other periphery things. That's what they wanted. So when I finally then gave them the report and the presentation, it was specifically about visibility. And there were a little nuggets that maybe I would throw in there to see if maybe I could get them to bite on that, which they did. But I had to make sure that specifically that's what they wanted and that's what they needed to do. Now, if you are in your own company or if you are working in a company that's already there and you're not a consultant per se, but you're a person that just has a great innovative idea, you still need to figure out what exactly do they see as the problem and what is the area that they're looking to improve in and where do they want that innovation to be. It may not be in some other areas, so you need to have that. Once you get to that point, then you come to the study design. This is where you're going to figure out your method, your procedure for analysis. And these procedures have to be planned. How are you going to get the information that you need to get for that particular area? One of the things that I did with the one that wanted to boost visibility is I then went ahead and did some research on their digital footprint. I made sure that I had some information about uh, analysis, like Google Analytics and that sort of thing. I gave some ideas and the basic thrust of how websites and social media interact together and come together. And so I went with that, but I had to have a plan and a procedure for how I was going to accumulate that information. It may be that there are some areas where you need information and you've got to figure out, can I get that information or is that private information, especially with HIPAA. So these are some things. And so then as saying that, you've got your plan and then you start gathering data. A lot of times, especially when you're doing this, the best thing to do is through interviews. Sometimes it's observations, sometimes questionnaires, um, and you analyze the results, and it's through this information that you have that you start gathering the things that you're doing. Now, here's something that I think is important for you to grasp hold of, and that is that you have to make it fit with what you're doing. If you are, for instance, working in a company, in an organization, and one of the things you have to be sensitive to is that you want to do this innovation, but you probably have your responsibilities you have to get done, and you can't interrupt other people in theirs. So that's why it's so important as you're gathering data at the study design, how can I get this done? And then how can I actually get this information? Well, once you gather the information, then you have to analyze that information. And I'm going to tell you something that I believe you should do, and that is that once you have a general analysis of what you feel like is the situation and what are some of the recommendations that you have, um, it's good sometimes to even bring in the client if you're a consultant, or to bring in a supervisor and to talk to that supervisor about um, here's the way I see it, and go through the information and go through everything that's happening so that you can get then to your recommendation. If you get them on board where that they see this, they like where this is going, they can see how this could be a benefit to them, and they bought into this, it will make the final feedback session even easier, which of course this brings me to the feedback. This is where then that you need to present your findings to the decision makers. And here's something important. There's many times that your supervisor or your client, depending on the relationship that you have, there's many times that they need you to do this. They need you to say the hard things because for political reasons or for whatever reason, it makes it very difficult for them to do that. And they need to then be able to say, well, okay. And so that being the case, you need to make sure you don't skimp on this step. You need to make sure that it is compelling, that your presentation is insightful, that it's exciting, so you need to make sure that you do that. Well, this is kind of the phases in this. So let's just look at them one more time. So you scout it out. This is again where you're going to be talking to the person that is in charge, the decision maker, and you're listening. You're doing a lot of listening and figuring out what is the lay of the land, what is the problem, what is the circumstance, this is the challenge that they see, and then you come to an agreement as to what exactly is it that they feel like needs to be innovated, or what is it that needs to be changed? And then you figure out what's going to be the design of this study that I do, or what's going to be the design for me to be able to get a concrete fix on this diagnosis, what's really wrong. And then you've got to then go forth and do some of the data gathering. You've got to make sure that this is done and done in a timely manner. And then finally, you're going to do some analysis. And I encourage you that once you've done some analysis, that you bring in some of the key decision makers to help you in that diagnostics or in that analysis. And finally, then be prepared to give a compelling piece of feedback to the decision makers. Okay, so then in doing this, and especially in the analysis, in fact, even throughout the process, there are some questions that you might want to ask yourself. If you're a consultant, there's some questions that you want to ask yourself. If you are if you're a person who would like to present this innovation, here's some of the questions you need to do. And so the first thing has to do with interpreting the initial statement of the problem. As you're listening, the decision maker, the client, the supervisor, whoever it is going to give an initial definition of what they believe the problem is, what they believe the needs are, and what the challenges are that faces the organization, or that faces that particular unit, or faces that particular ministry. And what you're looking for is, how does the client view the problem? how do they view the state of the organization? If they feel like, boy, this organization is so far behind the times, this organization is so ill run, this organization just, it's going down, or whatever that initial, that'll be important as you begin to interpret the problems that you're facing with it. How do they view this problem? Are they extremely frustrated or not? Second thing, then as a person who's trying to diagnose this organizational problem, sometimes you have to redefine the problem um, so that you can come up with a workable solution. Sometimes people spread the jam just a little bit thick on the bread. Sometimes they overstate the position, and you have to really filter that and say, well, is it really that bad, or are they just frustrated with the way that things are right now? So I think that's important. Um, and so here's some things to think about. For instance, when you look at this, what are some of their assumptions that they have about the preferred state of the organization? In other words, how do they see organizational effectiveness? And this will be important, as if you see something where they see this thing as, well, this is the only way to be successful. For instance, just to give you an example of this, if you're coming in and you need to you're wanting to help a church that has become stagnant, or even maybe is in decline, and you begin to talk to them, and maybe they're running right now 30 people, maybe they're running 40 people, and they look at it and say, well, organizational success is if we're running 400. Well, that'll be important for you to know, because you can then realize, well, that may be great to have 400 people, but maybe organizational success is where that you stop the decline and you actually start increasing, maybe by 10, 15, maybe even 30% in the early stages of this. And maybe you figure out what is causing the problem of attrition that's taking place, and that sort of thing. So it's redefining the problem, and recognize it may be that for some people, they say, well, the only way that, for organizational success for us is if we have people buying items in the store. Oh, we have a lot of people buying online, but why aren't they coming in the store? And so that would help you then to understand, well, what is the real nature of what you're trying to do? Is it that you need people in the store, or is it the fact that you need to make sales? So these are some of the things. And then um, understand the current state of the organization. Um, it is really important that you do not um, skip this state. Um, in other words, what is happening right now in this particular organization? What is taking place right now with the people that are there? For instance, how is this problem currently being dealt with, whatever the problem is? How is it right now? How are you addressing this particular problem? How do members of the relevant groups, how are they defining the problem? How do they suggest solving it? Uh, what organizational resources, what organizational strengths could contribute to solving the problem? What are some of the strengths, and what are some of the resources that could possibly improve effectiveness that you're doing? What do you have in your hand? What do you have in your house that could help you to do that? So that would be something. And then number four, identifying the forces for and against change. Once you've got an understanding, and let's just go back through this, you've heard the problem from them. Now you've kind of defined the problem as to what the real problem is. Uh, you've looked at the current state of where things are and people's attitudes about that. Then you need to figure out, okay, so if we implement change, where are there going to be people, are there going to be units, are there departments that are going to be resistant to that change for whatever? Am I going to have a hurdle to cross there? Do I have certain people that are absolutely for change and are driving this change? And so this is important. And then finally, developing some workable solutions. And this is an important thing, because I believe the best way to start here, because it encourages the people that you're with. What are some immediate fixes that you have? What are some things that you could fix immediately? The easy changes that would improve effectiveness. Um, if this will improve the outcome, it will give people, hey, this wasn't so bad, and you can kind of ease into some of the others. Let me give you something about maybe some of the levels of analysis as well. When you start dealing with levels of analysis, there are three levels, as you can see on your screen. There is the individual level. That's where you're dealing with, you realize you're dealing with somebody, and maybe you're dealing with their particular attitude about the business. Why are they soured? Why aren't they motivated? Is there a reason why, maybe within the structure of the organization or that sort of thing, that causes a person, hey, I'm not motivated to go beyond this. I'm not going to do, why should I do more? And maybe there's a reason for that, or maybe work behavior that's taking place, and you need to get people more passionate, or maybe they're being sloppy, or maybe the quality is going down because of their work behavior. So these are some things. That's the individual level. And then you have the interpersonal level. This is dealing with face-to-face interactions. Maybe you've got some, conflicting forces here. Some people that are, where you got people that are fussing, and people that you can tell there's hostility there, or there's tension there, there's stress there. And what's causing that stress, and how can you somehow resolve that stress? And finally, then there is the group level analysis, where that you're dealing here with performance of the group, some practices of the departments or the work units, and maybe this is a structural issue. Maybe there are some physical situations there where they're having to go all the way to another part of the office or another part of the factory in order to be able to get things that they need to come back to theirs, and it's just a simple logistic thing. But you're analyzing this because the goal of this, again, is to introduce an innovation or a change that will improve the organization that you are working for, in whatever capacity that happens to be. Well, that brings me then to the final thing, and that has to do with our methods. Let me say that the method that you use to create your analysis and to get your information is really dependent upon the situation that you're dealing with. But there are two things that I want you to see that I think are important. And so here's the first one. Choose wisely. There is a risk of false positive results that lead to recommended steps, that are unjustified, that can't even be harmful to the client or the organization. So you need to make sure that you've done your due diligence, that you have done your research, that you make sure that there are certain things that you're looking at that are legitimate, that you're not dealing with just one side, you're not listening. For instance, one of the things that I have to caution my students, and especially when they are learning about executive leadership, and is to go from a white collar, or to go from a blue collar mentality to a white collar blue mentality. And you say, what do I mean by that? Going from the person who is the worker, okay, which is fine, and I have a certain perspective as being on the line, being in the office cubicle, or being in my own little office. I am from that perspective, And then there is the perspective of, hey, I'm in administration, and I not only have you, the worker, as a stakeholder, but I've also got my bosses who are stakeholders, and also even people outside the organization. So I have to make decisions based on that. And so, as a consultant, or as a person, an innovation manager, or as a person who is wanting to be a change agent, make sure that as you are, you know, coming up with your analysis and you're doing your studies, that you make sure that the information that you have is complete. Here's the second thing. Never tell someone they have an ugly baby. Sometimes we come into a program and immediately we want to talk about how bad the program is, how inept the program is. I told you about the missions nonprofit that I was doing some consulting for, and their website left some to be desired. There was just a lot of problems with that website, and so but I knew I had to be very, very careful when I came in to that presentation. And the reason I had to be so careful is because, in all likelihood, one of the board members that was there, or one of the people that was directly in charge, I already knew, just through some private research that I did, that they had this website developed. They've spent money on this. This was somebody's baby. And for me to come in and to tell them that they've got an ugly baby, that this website was horrible, that this thing was terrible, all it was going to do was be off-putting to people. It was going to cause them to erect a wall between me and them, and it was going to be extremely hard for me to be able to have my implementation or my proposal for change to be accepted. And so you have to be very, very careful. Never tell someone that they have an ugly baby. Well, that's lecture one. Hopefully, it's been a benefit to you. Next week, we're going to be delving into diagnostics, and we're going to be dealing with the open system model. And it'll be very, very advantageous to you. So hopefully, you'll enjoy that. God bless you, folks.